I'll just ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they do and their backgrounds, and then we can get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alia Furman, and I am the Regional Director for DCED, which is the Department of Community and Economic Development. And the work we do for the state is focused on creating healthy communities and fostering opportunities for businesses to grow.
Good morning. My name is Ian Stewart. I'm a graduate of the Hill School from class of 96. I currently own a preservation timber framing company in New York. We work from the Maritimes down to Virginia and sometimes overseas. I'm also the president of the Preservation Trades Network, and I'm here this morning to talk to you about historic preservation tax credits. And there has been, over the last 40, 50 years, an animosity between developers and preservationists in many places that doesn't need to exist. And preservation can actually be profitable for developers in the realm of tax credits and also just sort of economic development. We've seen in places like Lowell, Massachusetts, and New Bedford, Charleston, Richmond, preservation has a real tangible effect on both development and neighborhood.
So I'll be talking about the Neighborhood Assistance Program, which is a tax credit program with the state, where essentially, what our department tries to do, as I said, is have businesses working with communities, working with the government. So instead of us coming in and telling a community, this is what you need, or business saying that the communities come to us, and then we work with the businesses and we give them a tax credit based on a contribution that they give to a 501c3. So to qualify for a neighborhood assistance tax credit, which a nonprofit applies for, the work that they're doing must be A, must serve a low-income population, and B, must be geographically defined. What geographically defined means is it needs to be essentially an area smaller than a county, so Montgomery County couldn't apply, but a project that works in Pottstown could apply and would be eligible. When you apply, you need to tell us, once you have the place narrowed down, what's the problem? What's the problem that you're looking to solve? So if you tell us, the problem is we have a high school dropout rate, then it would make sense that your specific project would be something along the lines of, let's just say, after-school tutoring or after-school activities. And it needs to be something that your organization does. So if it's Habitat for Humanity and they're applying to build houses, that makes sense. We trust that Habitat for Humanity knows how to build houses. If it's Habitat for Humanity applying for an after-school program to teach kids math, that's a little iffy. So it needs to be, again, an organization that we know they're an expert at what they do. And you need to show us quantitative results. So, and this, we always say, as a nonprofit, count everything that you do. The more numbers, the more data you have, the better your application will be, and the more you'll be able to track real progress. Within the NAP program, there's a few different sub-programs, and for our purposes, I'll focus on 3 today. So the NAP program is just the general one-year program, no minimum, no maximum. It focuses on one project, and the business receives a 55% tax credit. The SPP, Special Program Priorities, also one-year program, and no minimum, no maximum, but you receive a 75% tax credit. So what's the caveat there? You need to fit within one of 9 very specific state priorities, examples of which are elimination of blight, diversity initiatives, serving vulnerable populations. So as I'm saying this, some of you are probably thinking, these can be pretty broad. And what's really nice about this program is we don't tell you what these priorities mean. You tell us. So what diversity initiatives may mean to you may be different than what it means to you. And the burden of proof is on you. We don't tell you how it needs to fit that criteria. You tell us why you think your specific project fits that specific state priority. And then the last program is NPP, which is Neighborhood Partnership Program. This is a long-term program. It's a 5-year program at minimum, can go up to 8 years. If you finance it at 5 years, it's a 75% tax credit. If you finance it at up to 8 years, it's an 80% tax credit. And in this program, you need to have a minimum of 50,000 contribution from a business and a minimum 100,000 contribution per year. And in these programs, we're not looking for one project. We're looking for a more comprehensive approach, and we're looking for it to be part of a community plan. Whether that community plan is from the county or from the Bureau, it's up to you. But with that amount of money, we hope you're doing more than just one thing. One question that I often ask is, what's the minimum that we as a nonprofit can receive? There is no minimum. If you have someone who's willing to give you $10 million, take it all, good for you. The maximum is on the amount of tax credits that we as the state can give to the business. And that max for all of the programs is, if you're contributing to 1 or 2 programs, it's $500,000. If you're contributing to 3 or more, it's $1.25 million. So as a nonprofit, as you're looking for contributors, I can tell you that there's a very few that hit that max. And again, and that is just for the NAP program. So you can be getting other credits from other state programs, from other federal programs, and that doesn't meet those maximums. When the nonprofit applies, you need to have that corporate commitment. You can't apply with a solicitation plan. You can't apply with a tentative commitment. You need to have it on paper. Unlike other state programs, the business does not apply. Only the nonprofit applies, and all we need from the business is a simple commitment letter on their stationery saying, if nonprofit X receives these tax credits, we'll give them Y. If you apply for the 5-year commitment, then you do need an MOU, which is a very simple, straightforward MOU. So the burden on the business is very minimal. Unlike EITC, where both the business applies and the school applies, and then they need to figure out and match up, only the nonprofit applies here. The business can do a few things with the tax credits. You can hold it for up to 5 years. It's not a use it or lose it like with some of the other programs. You can pass through if you're any type of partnership, and you can sell the tax credits. Among the tax credits, the taxes that can be counted against, you can use it for the bank and trust company shares tax, which is a flat rate tax that all banks and insurance companies pay in Pennsylvania. So they know, regardless of whether they're at a gain or a loss that year, they'll be paying that tax. So if you're a nonprofit looking for contributors, I would urge you that the first place you should look is go on your board. If there's anyone in any bank, any insurance companies, go to them because they likely have a significant liability. This program is very unique because all of the other funding that we have through DCED and really through the state is for brick and mortar project. Since we're not giving a 501c3 funds, we're giving a tax credit to a corporation, we can't tell the nonprofits what to use the money on. So, what I hear from nonprofits all the time is what's toughest to fund is salaries, is the rent, is the programs. Those are not the sexy projects to sell. But with this program, as long as those efforts are going towards the project you specified, you can use the dollars for salaries for any of those programmatic costs. And in that way, that program is incredibly unique and can be an incredible tool. It's currently used in Pottstown for 2 separate projects, but I think we'd love to see it be used even more here because this town I don't think I need to tell anyone in the room, but so much potential to grow, and the state wants to be a part of it and wants to be a partner where it can. So I'll pass it on to you.
So one of the first generally held misconceptions about the National Historic Preservation Act, the creation of the National Register, is that inclusion on the National Register legislates what you can and cannot do with your building. That's incorrect. In 1966, when the law was written and signed into law, it legislated all of the police power locally. So if you're thinking about using preservation tax credits, the first thing is find out what the local commission has to say. Caveat, a local commission can have the power to tell you what you're doing with the exterior of your building. No commission has the power to tell you what you are doing to the interior of your building. Commissioners sometimes like to overstep and say, no, you can't change the color inside your house. Just remind them that preservation commissions, their power stops at what is visible from the curb. Now, that being said, being on the National Register opens you up, if it is an income-producing property, so rental, business leaseholding. Once you're income-producing property and you need to fulfill several conditions to get the tax credits. You need to be a listed member of the National Register. The building needs to be listed on the National Register. It needs to be listed as part of a district. But once you're inside a district, it gets a little looser. It can be a listed member. It can be called a contributing member, which means that the National Park Service survey people said that it contributes to the feel of the district. Or the most vague and most often used term with tax credits is it's eligible for National Register nomination. Doesn't even have to be on the register, it just has to be eligible, and you have to make a case for it. Once you have identified the property, you figure out how much, that you want to acquire it, you want to go for the tax credits. In Pennsylvania, you have to go through the Pennsylvania Museum and Historical Commission. The Pennsylvania tax credit is 25% of the overall rehabilitation costs in a period of 5 years. Like the NAP, you can hold them. So if you do it and for 5 years you don't need it, or for 4 years you don't need it, you can use it in the 5th year. It is not fungible. Up until the 80s, they were fungible. It is no longer fungible. So if you personally don't need it, but say your investor does, you have to form an S Corp or an LLC, whatever legal government, legal body, business. Anyone who is an owner or a partner in that business can claim any part of that tax credit for a 5-year period. So 25% of the overall cost, but the cap in Pennsylvania is $500,000. So really, you're looking at a $2 million project. Federally, same thing, 5 years, non-fungible, within the organization. The cap is $4 million in tax credits. So a $20 million project. That's 20%. So if you do a $20 million project in Pennsylvania, say you take a factory that's on the register and convert it into 400-unit apartment building, and the rehabilitation cost is $20 million, that means you've got $4.5 million in tax credits you can play with, and that's just historic tax credits. Any of the other tax credits you can claim in the state are fair game. The process is relatively simple. You find the property, you figure out if it's on the register or it's in a district or if it's eligible. A lot of times in New England, we do this with industrial buildings, textile mills, whatnot. And a lot of times they're not on the register. They might be part of a mill village district, but then you tend to pay a consultant to knock together the 160-page form that is the National Register nomination, get that in the pipeline, you meet with the Pennsylvania Museum Historical Commission and you meet with the National Park Service. They're the ones who govern federally the tax credits here in the United States. And what they're looking to do is basically save pieces of the building. So in projects where I've been involved with public schools, the passage corridors and the central staircases were the defining characteristics interior of the building. So the developer had to leave the big central staircase and the main passage hallways. There are other buildings they'll just say, you know what, there are these nice corbels on the facade, please don't remove those. Preservationists, especially those working with the tax credits, want to see development and developers going into historic properties. So we try to make it as easy as possible for the building to be saved and to continue to be used, and yet maintain some of its architecture. I can tell you, 15 years ago when I got into this, I was much more of a purist. These days, my whole philosophy is if a building is not being used, what's its purpose? Another thing is we're starting to get into a lot of environmental tax credits because preservation is the greenest form of building. That building paid its carbon debt 50, 60 years ago. And you'll find, at least in New York, where I do a lot of work, where we have brick infill on walls. Brick infill insulation tends to end up with an R value of 60 or 70. And when you're talking about freestanding townhouses, with an R value of 60 or 70, the heating costs are minimal. So, but preservation tax credits, a lot of times people kind of shy away from them because they think there are a lot of hurdles to jump through. It's not that bad. And there are people like me all over the East Coast, all over the country, who just deal with meeting with commissions and then dealing with the government, so can help you through the process.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple minutes for any questions or comments. Anyone? Well, again, if you could just, oh good, thank you.
Two-part question. Do you have to get the tax credits application approval right after the start of the renovation, or can it be done as you go renovation or that?
For a historic? Yeah. So on a historic property, the permissions have to be in place before the renovation for the tax credits. Tax credits cannot be claimed retroactively on a historic preservation project. So if you've got a property and you've already doing the rest of the renovations, you cannot apply for the tax credit status. Because really what the National Park Service and the State Commission are trying to avoid are people who have already gone in and changed some of those things that maybe the state would have liked you to have kept, like those staircase in the school. So everything has to be in place. And as a follow-up, anything that they give you that is a listing of what they require for those preservation tax credits, the hallways, the staircase, maybe it's some exterior lighting. For the 5 years that you are eligible to claim that, you can't change those. But at the 5-year mark, you can. So at 5 years plus 1 day, you can change the things. They kind of hope that at that point you're not going to, but the legislation runs out at 5 years. Also, whoever's in the organization that owns and can claim the tax credits as a pass-through, they have to stay in the organization for 5 years. So the period of time that you can claim the tax credits is also the period of time that the organization has to stay as a viable entity. So if you have a partnership and you've claimed your tax credits, and at 4 years and 10 months, your partnership falls apart, the tax credits have to be paid back. So if you're doing it as a partnership, it's got to stay together for 5 years. If you're doing it as a single entity, it's much easier. But a lot of people end up doing it as partnerships because since the credits are no longer fungible, that's a lot of hook that people get is getting the tax credits to their investors while the developer continues to claim credits elsewhere. Does that answer your question? If you are going for the tax credits and it's on the register, you have to apply before doing the work. If you want the tax credits. If you don't want the tax credits, do as you will, unless there's a local commission that tells you not to do it. But there are very few commissions in the country that have the ability to actually stop you from doing your work. And I mean, even Massachusetts, which has some of the most rigorous preservation laws in the nation, the longest demo delay bylaw in Massachusetts is 17 months. So that's another thing. People think once you've got your building in the National Register, it can never be altered and or torn down. And that's it's just not true. The National Register is honorific, and it protects you from easement seizure by the government and transportation projects that are federally funded. So, yeah.
One other question? Do we have that? I know that Twyla has been looking into the Neighborhood Assistance Program, both in terms of possible operating support as well as for project support. And I think part of the value of this event is that we might be able to do some networking and think about whether there are businesses that we know that might benefit from that. We've got several months until the application cycle begins, so there's an opportunity here.